Welcome back to the KRUSE Elite Podcast. What's up, Tony?
Good morning, Taylor.
What's happening?
So I got some scarves.
Oh, nice.
To juggle with.
Oh, good. You're ahead of me. I haven't done that yet.
You know, Amazon's fast.
Yeah.
And I finally got my green glasses.
Oh, cool.
Because I think I told you last time they sent me the wrong color.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to try green out. It's on my list.
Nice.
But yeah, the scarves are cool. I can actually do like 2 rounds of juggling before I lose track of which hand is supposed to do what.
Sure.
Whatnot. So learning curves.
Yeah.
I
That's
also
awesome.
imagine, could you like tape a coin or something to them to make them a little more, because at some point they're just like all in the way.
Right. Yeah, because they open up and they get kind of big. Yeah.
Yeah.
That, you know what? I've never thought of that. Taping a coin in there would be great. You can also, what I did when I was using them a lot with clients is I would tie a knot in them.
Smart.
Like
Okay.
just like one overhand knot usually makes them a little more, they just like almost denser so that they fall a little faster and things don't get so messy and tangled in the air.
Yeah. That's what I'm running into now. So
yeah, play around with that because that can work pretty good.
yeah, super fun.
You can do a lot with those. Just like throwing them up, spinning around, catching them. Like I used to do fun athletic games where you would, the athlete would have their back turned to you, and you'd be in like typically I would do what we call like a athletic ready position, and then I'd have them hip turn on my command, which is kind of in that universal athletic ready position. And then when I say go, they hip turn 180 degrees. So now they're facing me, and I throw 2 scarves in the air. One is, let's say, red and one is blue. And I say red or blue, and that's the one they have to grab. And so there's
cool.
it's kind of like a reaction based game. And I might say, okay, I want you to grab, only with your left hand or only with your right hand. And you can do really cool, like inhibition style games where, you throw them, maybe you're using red and green, and you have them do something, almost like assign a movement to a color. And then they, let's say, grab green, but they have to do a movement. Or I do a single scarf and it's either green or red. And if it's red, they don't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's green, they do. Yeah. There's so much you can do there. That was a really fun tool.
I'm so excited for the KRUSE Elite summer camp. Every time we talk about this stuff, I'm like, this needs to happen. When is this going to happen?
Yeah, that would be fun.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Anything new in your world?
Not necessarily new, just enjoying summer, trying to dial it back a little bit in terms of the work intensity. And, we've been still chipping away, but, trying to get outside more and not working as much as we were before, which is nice. We've got another camping trip coming up beginning of August, so I'm looking forward to that. And I've been getting some fishing in when I can, and it's actually been kind of an up and down, rough at times fishing season, but it's nice to be out there. We just had weird weather to start the whole season, lots of rain, lots of high water, and it kind of threw weird curveballs at me in terms of the conditions. Mm-hmm. So it hasn't been as good as it can be, but hey, it's still been fun to get out there.
So when the water's high, is that harder for fishing, or does it just change where they go? Or?
So I think my whole theory really is just that. So the type of fishing that I'm doing, I'm targeting trout, and in the summertime, a lot of it is about bugs, right? So you got to kind of know. We call it hatch season. So insects that live in the river, they hatch, and the trout will become very keyed in on specific bugs at specific times, and you have to have the right flies to match those hatches. And the hatches happen based on like water temperature and time of year. Mm-hmm. And we had a bunch of basically flooding happen during the prime hatches. And so the water was so high, I couldn't fish during prime time, which was heartbreaking. And then after that, the water temperatures changed pretty drastically. So the best hatches were gone. Mm-hmm. And so now there's just not as much going on. There's not as much activity. So you kind of got to luck into some good conditions. And So I just get out there and go when I can. And I did have one good evening not too long ago. But then I went out a couple nights ago and got beat up. Nothing was going on. And it was, so it's just up and down.
Yeah. Interesting. I never would have known that about hatches. That's so cool.
Yeah. It's all water temp and conditions. And like right now, the water temperature is kind of balancing on the side of things where it's getting closer to too warm, because when the water gets too warm, you lose your bug activity, but then you don't want to fish for trout in really warm water. When it gets to about 68 degrees, it's time to kind of call it quits, because I catch and release it, and it's you'll kill the fish if you hook them and stress them out in warmer water temps.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The elevated sympathetic responses in the fish.
Exactly. Like they'll swim away and you'll be like, okay, they're good, but it doesn't mean that they survive. Yeah.
Interesting. I imagine, especially if you're in the same region, that like year after year, the more seasons you experience, the more just like in tune you are with the ecosystem
100%.
at large. Yeah.
100%. Like it's cool. Like I'm walking out there and hiking. It's a place I fish is real hard to get into. And you start there's like little markers that nature shows you that you sort of end up matching with like certain conditions. Like there's like different plant life and different things that you'll notice. Like, oh yeah, when these berries are out, like these conditions are usually happening. And those conditions usually mean, this insect and the fishing's good. And you get like familiar with these little markers, and as the seasons change, and it's kind of cool like that.
Yeah. That feels healthy in and of itself somehow. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But just being in tune with nature,
Yep.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, yesterday I was brushing my teeth and I had a big glass of water on the sink, and finished brushing my teeth. I don't know if I was distracted or what. And I just kind of like dropped my hand and it just hits the glass. Glass knocks over, breaks everywhere on my bathroom floor. So speaking of sympathetic levels being raised, and it occurred to me that was very clumsy of me. And you said something in an episode, I don't know, like 2 months ago or a while back. And you were like, oh yeah, the parietal lobe, we associate actually with clumsiness.
Right.
And I think maybe, I don't want to put her on the spot, but I think you maybe said something like Alicia actually jokes about this, about her parietal lobe, because she can find herself being clumsy at times. And I think that was her. But
yeah, it was.
That just a light bulb went up in my head, and I was like, well, I don't know anything about the parietal lobe. I can be clumsy at times. I stub my toes. And it's just something I think we can all relate to, or there's someone we know close to us that is that person in the house, right?
Right.
And so I'm just very curious about the parietal lobe, its connection to clumsiness, which in my mind says something about awareness and coordination, or both. And then from an applied neurology perspective, can we train it? Can we do something about it?
Right. Yes, we can. Yeah. So I remember talking about this a little bit, and that the whole thing with Alicia that we sort of bring up and joke about, it's a certain kind of clumsiness, I guess you would say, when we're talking about the parietal lobe, because one of the history findings with the parietal lobe is actually bumping into things a lot. And so the thing that we joke about with Alicia is that she always has random bruises on her.
That's right.
Like on the outsides of her hips, she'll get bruises, and she'll be like, there's those bruises again. Like, what the heck did I do? I don't remember doing anything. And other times she'll be like, oh, there's me bumping the side of the table again with my hip. And that's kind of the type of clumsiness that we're talking about, versus like a clumsiness that would be more maybe related to the cerebellum, where there are accuracy and rhythm issues with movement. Obviously these things do overlap with one another, because you can't completely separate any of these functions and findings of different brain areas, because everything's always working together. But yeah, with the cerebellum, we're typically thinking more accuracy rhythm related errors being that type of clumsiness. But with the parietal lobe, it's all about spatial awareness. So it's unique in that respect because the parietal lobe it's the home of your spatial awareness. So basically, understanding where you are in the environment, and at the same time understanding where other objects are. That's the type of spatial awareness we're talking about.
Fascinating. Yeah, that was on my list of questions, was like, what's the difference between cerebellar deficit of
Yeah,
coordination and this? And
right.
you answered it quite succinctly. Um, so yeah, the parietal lobe is related to spatial awareness. Is that its primary function? Is it one of its functions? Is there more going on with it?
Yeah, there's definitely more going on than just spatial awareness, but that's really, especially for the work that I do, it's actually one of the easier lobes to understand as far as, our assessments of it and the drills that we can do for it. But it's also one of the most important ones because as a movement person, all movement is a parietal lobe stimulus. So one of the things to know about it is that this is where your somatosensory map is. So essentially, your brain's map of the body, at least one of them. Okay, there's lots of different forms of maps, at the brain level, but the somatosensory map lives here. So this is also an area where sensory processing happens. So, like we did our episode on the spinal cord and spinal mobility, and we talked a lot about sensory stimulus. We talked about receptors at the skin level. We talked about peripheral nerves, that information coming in from the outside world, making its way to the spinal cord, and then ascending, eventually getting to the brain. And when that sensory input gets to the brain, a large part of it is processed in the contralateral cortex. And the parietal lobe is that area that we're thinking about as far as that sensory processing. So all movement is a parietal lobe stimulus, and all sensory input, either the sensory input coming from movement or sensory input that we might use in testing, like if we're using vibration, if we're using light touch, if we're using sharp sensation, warm, cool sensation. When you put your clothing on and you feel that against your skin, right? When you put your shoes on and you tie them too tight and you feel that as too tight. When you go outside and you walk barefoot through the grass, and how that's different from feeling, gravel underneath your feet, maybe in the driveway, right? All of these sensations that we feel from different things, that information coming in from the outside world is eventually processed in this area called the parietal lobe. So it's highly important for the work that we do because I spend a lot of time sensory testing people, because sensory, the person's ability to sense things accurately, is super important when you are rehabilitating injury, let's say, or you just want to improve the quality of movement, right? We want to be able to run tests to understand a person's ability to sense. Is it accurate? Are they sensing something are they hypersensitive? Or is there a loss of sensation? When there's a loss of sensation or even hypersensitivity, that can and probably will affect their quality of movement. So this is a really important area for anybody that is using movement as a tool for training, for rehabilitation. And if you're using any kind of sensory type of tool, like maybe your own hands as a manual therapist, or anything else that you are applying to the body that is felt, well, guess what? This parietal lobe is a massive target. Whether you know it's a target yet or not, you are training the parietal lobe.
Mm-hmm. So I want to bring in an example from last episode. You had talked about a client that had broken his neck,
Yeah.
not once, but twice.
Yeah.
And one of the things you were testing was sensation on the feet.
Right.
And you were telling me that he was feeling certain sensations, sharp, he was feeling dull, he was feeling cold, but he wasn't feeling vibration or light touch.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this could be a problem, as we discuss this in the context of the spine. This could be a problem down the levels, right?
Exactly. Yep.
But it occurred to me that then the parietal lobe, based on what you're describing, is missing inputs.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is, in a situation like that, would you want to stimulate the parietal lobe perhaps anyways, even if the problem is way down in the foot or in the spine, to try to give it that missing input?
Yes, that's a great question, great insight. That is exactly how you have to think. And this idea right here, this is why so many of the sensory training attempts don't go anywhere for people. You know, I hear this all the time talking to our students and our clients and just people even DMing me saying, I tried this therapy, I tried that therapy, it feels good. I might get a temporary, type of result from it, but I'm not really getting anything beyond that. And this is often wise because the different levels are not addressed. And not only are they not addressed, but the person is not assessed in a way that you can figure out where the primary issues might be. So, when you have a large deficit like the guy that I was talking about, and he wasn't able to feel like, let's say, vibration on several parts of his body, that absolutely is now an input problem for the parietal lobe. So as we go through the levels, looking at how that information passes through the nervous system to the spinal cord and eventually gets to the brain, we have to understand the pathways and where the pathway begins as far as the receptor level goes. So like what nerve receptors are responsive to vibration, because maybe that's where the problem is. But there also could be a peripheral nerve issue, right? Where that information now has to travel a peripheral nerve to get to the spinal cord. And maybe there's peripheral nerve issues. Maybe there's a spinal cord issue. I think we said, like, if there's a problem at the spine, it's going to interrupt that superhighway, we called it, of traveling information, kind of like a kink in the garden hose. And eventually, as that information makes its way up towards the brainstem, eventually it crosses over. Knowing where it crosses over is super important because that's another structure that we have to be thinking about. So if it's vibration, it crosses in the medulla, which is the lower aspect of the brainstem. And perhaps there's an issue there. And as we keep following the pathway, we're going to arrive at where it ends as far as processing goes, and that will be the parietal lobe. So technically, somebody who, let's say, has a deficit, a large sensory deficit, let's say in their left foot, and they can't feel vibration, that automatically means they have a right parietal lobe input issue. So if that problem is long-standing, right, you kind of see this happen in different ways for different people. They have a loss of sensation in their left foot. Therefore, that might manifest eventually into reduced brain activation in the right parietal lobe, because most of that sensory input is going to go contralaterally. Reduced brain activation in the right parietal lobe can contribute to that loss of sensation, but it can also cause other issues. So this is why we have to understand our levels and think about this when we're considering like history and what we know about the person. A lack of cortical activation contralaterally is going to impact coordination, especially on that left side of the body. It's going to interrupt sensory processing, and it could even start to kind of have a downstream effect on the right side of the brainstem, which now you might be seeing other reflexive stability problems on the right side of the body, even
Poor
different
muscle tone,
autonomic,
perhaps.
autonomic issues, muscle tone, exactly. So this is why it's so important to know those levels, because as you learn about a person through your testing, you can start to go, okay, I'm starting to kind of see the whole picture here. This person that's had, very widespread left side sensory deficits, has coordination issues on the left side of their body, also has maybe decreased activation in the right cortex, and that's going to also maybe manifest in those right-sided issues more related to, let's say, the brainstem. So, yes, it's when you have a sensory deficit, you're going to automatically have a contralateral effect, right? There's going to be something going on contralaterally. And kind of going back to your original question, should you train the parietal lobe, even if maybe the parietal lobe is not the primary issue? And the answer is yes, it can be extremely valuable to target these areas along the entire pathway to restore sensation somewhere else. So, and this is where neurology just gets so cool because, for example, I'm thinking of a different client, and actually I've used this many times over the years, but speaking of like vibration deficits and knowing that the pathway that's transmitting that input or that information crosses in the medulla, one of the ways that I've had a lot of success helping people to restore sensation is by having them do other drills and inputs for the medulla. So, for example, finding a vibration deficit, let's just use that left foot again.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps we apply vibration to the left foot and that assesses well, but the results don't stick. Maybe we have to do then some neuromechanic drills for the nerve, the peripheral nerve that's involved with that part of the body. So let's just say it's the bottom of the foot. And we want to be thinking about a branch of the sciatic nerve called the tibial nerve. So maybe we're doing some neuromechanic drills for the tibial nerve while applying vibration to the bottom of the foot. Now we have a stronger stimulus. We can keep working up through the levels and, for example, maybe apply brainstem inputs, something simple like humming. Humming while you're doing all this can actually then help. And maybe going to even the next level and thinking about the parietal lobe and doing something to activate the parietal lobe at the same time. This is where we start getting into some of those really clever stacks of multiple inputs together to make the whole thing stronger and work better, which hopefully will provide better results in the moment, but also long term. So that's kind of a neat way to look at sensory testing and training, is to just go through those levels. And I've had many experiences where I'm testing vibration on a person and they're like, yeah, I don't really feel that very strong compared to the other side. I've even had some people say, I don't feel that at all. And then I have them start like humming or gargling water. And like after a minute of gargling water, they're like, no way, I feel that now. From activating the medulla through gargling. It's really cool to experience something like that.
Yeah, it's just like waking up that part of the brain almost.
Definitely.
So a bit on anatomy.
Yeah.
You mentioned the parietal lobe is in the cortex.
Yep.
Where exactly, or roughly maybe, is it, just for our mental model of the brain here?
Yeah, just think, the common picture that people can kind of visualize of the brain and the lobes that you can see. And we've talked on the podcast now a lot about the frontal lobe, where, is going to be towards the front of the head. Your parietal lobe is going to be more towards the back middle part. Mm-hmm. So not totally like as far back as you can go, because then we start getting into like the occipital lobe, which is more of like the home of visual processing. But near there, so kind of middle back, is going to be where the parietal lobe is.
Cool. And it's connected to the medulla, and I mean everything's connected, right? But
Yeah.
there's kind of a more direct pathway between.
Yeah. As far as our sensory pathways go, we break them apart into two different main distinct pathways when we're testing sensation with different sensations that we're using. So, for example, like light touch and vibration are what we call dorsal column sensations. And the dorsal column is the one I was describing that decussates in the medulla, whereas another pathway that we're commonly testing, more of the spinal thalamic system, is different sensations. It's more about temperature and crude touch sensations, things that become a little bit uncomfortable, which is like testing sharp for us. And that is a different pathway that takes a different road. And that one does not cross in the medulla. That one crosses more at the level of the spinal cord. So, for example, humming, when you're trying to restore temperature sensation somewhere, might not be the right drill because it does not cross in the medulla, but it does go to the parietal lobe. So I've had experience helping people restore things like temperature sensation with vision exercises. Okay, this is like woo-woo neurology that actually isn't woo-woo.
Right.
I've many times, more than I can remember, helped people restore sensation by doing smooth pursuits. And smooth pursuits is a visual tracking exercise where you follow the target. So basic smooth pursuit, you would follow your target from, let's say, middle to your right, where it's only your eyes tracking the target. It's not your head moving with your eyes. It's purely eye motion. That smooth motion of tracking an object, that's what we call a smooth pursuit. And the neurology of eye movements is quite complex, but very simply speaking, whatever side I track my target to, that's the side of the parietal lobe it's going to activate. So if I wanted to activate my right parietal lobe, I would follow my visual target to my right.
Mm-hmm.
So having someone do right smooth pursuits while you are applying a sensation on the left side of their body, like warm or cool or sharp, you might be able to help them improve being able to feel that sensation by using a vision exercise because you are lighting up the parietal lobe.
Mm-hmm.
It's so cool to see. That's one of the cooler things that I feel like I've experienced, where you do something that seems completely unrelated, yet it is very related when you know the pathways.
Mm-hmm. I don't know why the mental image I'm getting with this is, you got a pathway, let's say from your left foot up to your right parietal lobe. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's more complicated than that, right? But I'm imagining it's like that light in this image in my head is where the signal is strong, and like darkness is where it kind of gets lost. And so there's
Yeah.
these dark patches along the way. And so all you're doing is you're using some other stimulus to light that part of the passage up, and it like connects
Well said.
the pathway. That's I don't know why that felt so powerful to me to
I love that.
visualize it that way, but
That's
yeah.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's kind of the way I think about it as well.
So you mentioned that an input problem in the parietal lobe could cause problems elsewhere. And one of the places that you mentioned specifically was like the brainstem,
Mm-hmm.
and then you also said the cerebellum. Reason I bring that up is to bring it back to clumsiness. You were kind of making the distinction between the parietal lobe's function with spatial awareness
Mm-hmm.
and coordination problems. But it sounds like these two things can go hand in hand at times.
Right.
So I guess my question is, can we talk a little bit more about that connection, and then also how you might be able to distinguish between the two.
Yeah. Do you mean kind of like our two-way street idea where
100%.
Yeah. So yeah, that's great. So let's say a person has had a concussion and their parietal lobe was affected. That problem beginning at the parietal lobe could cause sensory and motor issues and very specific sensory issues. So we can look at it that way versus just a sensory issue, let's say developing in the periphery because of an injury or a surgery or a scar, right? Because when you're sliced open for surgery, the receptor bed is damaged, right? And it has to heal. And oftentimes you're left with weird little sensory deficits when you have a scar on your body. That becomes an input problem eventually as we go upstream to the parietal lobe. So the parietal lobe, there's consequences to that, let's say, if the sensory loss is big enough. And that can impact loss of motor control too. So we can think about it that way. And then thinking about it coming from the other direction, you've had a head trauma, your parietal lobe was affected. There's so many reasons. It goes outside of my scope, but a different disease process, different degenerative diseases that can affect the brain, that may affect the parietal lobe, can then manifest downstream into motor and sensory problems. So actually thinking about Alicia again, the parietal lobe is a big target for her. So we think through testing. And she did. So she tells a story sometimes of playing softball when she was quite young. I think this was like 8th grade. And she was really quite good at softball. And she felt like it was a good sport for her. And she was very coordinated with what she was doing there. But then she had a concussion. And she said after that concussion, all of a sudden, she just could not throw a softball. Like it got so weird for her. She just ended up gravitating away from the sport altogether, like just made the decision to not pursue softball because it got so strange for her when initially she was really strong with that sport, throwing, catching, hitting, everything. And, we find through her history, we talked about her like randomly bumping into things. That's a big history finding for the parietal lobe. And through some other neuroassessments that are kind of pointing at the parietal lobe, this is a target for her. And this all may have started with that concussion that she had at a young age. And actually, Tony, if you think it's a good idea, I do have some history findings I can go through here.
I love a good case study.
Yeah, we mentioned a couple of them. These aren't specific to Alicia, but these are just general history findings that people, they're worth mentioning for the things that help us think about the parietal lobe. I mentioned a few of them already. So someone who bumps into things a lot, that would be kind of a classic one, bumping into things and not really, it's almost becomes a part of your life. Like you don't even really notice it anymore, but you do see the bruises on your body. So lack of spatial awareness altogether, lack of spatial awareness can show up a lot of different ways. For the coaches out there, you've probably worked with a client that just seems to have less spatial awareness than your other clients. I experienced this once in a while with a client now working virtually. And Alicia was saying she has a client that reminds her of this too. But sometimes when we do sessions like on Zoom virtually, it's very apparent that the person does not know necessarily where to be in the room or how to set up the camera so that the camera is viewing them appropriately for us, for the coaches. And it's a struggle every single time. And it's one of those things that you take for granted, but knowing where you belong in the room relative to everything else, and then figuring out where your camera needs to be to actually view you. People would hear that and go, well, that's easy. Right? But people with parietal lobe issues don't know how to do this. And in there, we have to constantly say, like, move your camera. I need you to take a few steps to the right. And they just never seem to be able to do it. And experientially, what I've figured out, because I've experienced this in person too, is some people with parietal lobe issues are very sensitive to where they are in the environment relative to shapes and lines. So I'm thinking of a client I work with online sometimes, and because of where the camera needs to be and it not being kind of symmetric to the lines in her room, she's standing on like a big oriental rug that is like a rectangle, but where the camera goes is not really lined up with that rectangle. It's off to the side. And the lines on the floor really throw her off comparatively to where the camera belongs. And I've had experiences like that in person when we had our old studio was shaped very strange. We were at the top floor and the roof was very sloped on one side, and it was a long slope on one side. And then it was sloped on the other side, but it was a short slope. So it sloped down and then it actually became vertical. And the room was a strange shape with lots of strange lines because of that. And we had a difference in, there was a middle line horizontal that separated what was kind of a studio room with mirrors and like a wood floor. And then on the other half was more gym style rubber floor. And so you got all these differences in shapes and colors and lines. And sometimes people with parietal lobe issues have a hard time navigating that. Right. And we can be talking about very healthy individuals. It's not, it's an interesting thing to pick up on. And typically those same people have a hard time with movement. They just don't learn it as easily. They're more uncoordinated. They have a hard time navigating movement sessions and using tools like kettlebells and dumbbells. And you got to spend a lot of time teaching them basics of movement. It's just parietal lobe issues create large deficits in motor control. So you can also see this in someone who has like no sense of personal boundary. So as we get into like some of the, people that have probably are less healthy and are dealing with some more complicated brain things, they might have a hard time knowing where they belong boundary wise. They might get really close to you to talk to you and not really realize it. There's probably going to be some cultural factors that are involved in this too, depending, but most of the time people kind of know where they belong when they're talking to you. And if you've ever talked to somebody who doesn't know where they belong and kind of violates that personal boundary, it's kind of weird. Yeah. It's like, whoa, why are you standing there?
He's a close talker, Jerry.
And that's a thing. So doesn't know where to put themselves in the environment. That could be relative to another person they're talking to, or just kind of having a hard time with objects. I have people walk backwards a lot, run backwards, do different exercises backwards. And it's very clear to me that some people have no idea where things are in the room when I start doing that, and other people are super dialed. And it's an interesting thing to observe. Other things, we talked about sensory loss. So any sensory loss would be a history finding for parietal lobe. Hypersensitive to touch and pain. So sometimes when there's parietal lobe issues, it's more of a survival response neurologically, but your brain will try to turn up different areas receiving input. And this is a survival strategy so that neurons can stay alive. Because when there's decreased activation, that means decreased activation of neurons. What you don't use, you lose. And this is the thing we don't want, which is degeneration or death of nerve cells. That's not good. And so the body tries to counter these input issues by turning up the volume of sensory input. So when a person has a sensory problem, you can become hypersensitive as a way to help keep those neurons alive. So we can see hypersensitivity to touch and pain as well. Localized,
and
yeah,
cold.
Go ahead.
So that hypersensitivity, would that
could be
also
any sensation.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be any sensation. And you can also see like localized periodic sensations that you experience, like tingly sensations or crawling sensations in a certain area of the body.
Mm-hmm.
This is thought to be kind of that concept happening where the brain is turning up the volume and trying to receive as much input as possible. It's kind of interesting because Alicia has an area on the right side of her back, like near her shoulder blade, where she always asks me if there's a bug crawling there. She's like, "Is there something on my back right there?" And it's, you can see this at kind of a more intense level too, clinical level, where people are dealing with this kind of a thing that's much more intense. We want to be thinking about the parietal lobe, because that's it could be that the parietal lobe is going through some possible degenerative changes, and the volume is being turned up to try to get all sensory input to get somewhere. Mm-hmm. Right? It's an interesting survival strategy. There are some right side and left side of the hemisphere differences that we discuss, like in our courses with the parietal lobe. Typically for the work that we do, we don't have to get into these too deeply, but we might, like, depending on the goal. But just real quick, because people may find it interesting. So there's an area of the parietal lobe called the inferior parietal lobule, which is just a structure that we look at sometimes. And
sounds like an insult.
Yeah. And left side. So just think left side of the parietal lobe is going to be more associated with right and left confusion. So just not knowing your right and your left, as well as you should. Reading, writing issues would be thinking about the left side. Difficulty with calculations. People who have been diagnosed with like dyslexia or some kind of learning challenge when they have these things is pretty common. Also, like, hard to find the word for something. So I guess like word retrieval when you're trying to describe something. All of these findings make us think more about the left side. For the right side, it's more that drawings can become difficult. Difficulty interpreting shapes or certain shapes, and difficulty interpreting maps. If you've ever known that person that just can't seem to figure out, how do I position this map relative to me so that I can understand it? That's kind of one that some people might be able to, think about themselves or somebody else that they can relate to. So other additional, findings that are interesting.
The parietal lobe seems incredibly important.
It's incredibly important. And it's one of those things where, we're like, okay, home of spatial awareness and sensory processing and movement matters, but then there's like so much more, mm-hmm. and that's typically how the lobes are. The lobes is like kind of funny. We narrow it down in education to, well, it does this thing. The frontal lobe is for executive processing, and the parietal lobe is for spatial awareness, and the occipital lobe is for visual processing, and the temporal lobe is for auditory processing, and it's way bigger than that. There's overlap. There's so many things, and there is also so much neurology I don't even know. Mm-hmm. That's like, it goes and it goes and it goes, which is cool. But we understand these basic things because, especially for the work that I do, these are the most important ones.
So one of the words I was expecting you to say as you were describing some of these signs of potential parietal lobe deficits was proprioception.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, because you talked about spatial awareness and where people are with their bodies. Is proprioception one of like the primary functions of this lobe, would you say?
Definitely.
Or
yeah.
is that a
definitely.
word you associate with a different brain area for some reason?
Proprioception is more than just the parietal lobe for sure.
Yeah.
Right. But it's but absolutely. You can think of the parietal lobe as a very important area for motor and sensory and proprioception, which is the sense of understanding where you are in space, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that feedback that your brain is getting from receptors and kind of the mechanical force that is happening or not happening, that is proprioception, being able to sense that. And it helps your brain understand where you are in space and how you're moving. And all of that input is going to eventually go to the parietal lobe.
Mm-hmm. So when I first started barbell training,
Mm-hmm.
I probably put on like 30 pounds over the course. I don't know exactly how long it took, but it was a fairly marked difference. Like I never got big. No one ever confused me for like a bodybuilder or a power lifter or something, but I went from being like pretty skinny to being not as skinny, right?
Yeah.
And I remember I kept bumping into the like door frame as I
Mm-hmm.
was walking through doors for a while. And I was just like, what the hell is this? And I just like kept hitting my shoulder. And I assumed, it's like, well, it's probably like what, like a half inch or something difference.
That's like what I was pretending to do when I was 16 and I got into lifting weights. I'd pretend to bump into things.
No, I was actually bumping into things. And like I said, it's not that I was actually big. It was
Yeah.
just, I feel like it was different.
Right.
And so that stopped happening at some
Yeah.
point. And so rather than it being like a deficit, I think that I needed to recalibrate.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of curious, like, how would you think about that through an applied neurology lens? Like, are you thinking about training the parietal lobe or doing anything to like help make that map change?
Yeah. I mean, in that scenario, it's probably, that kind of thing usually just resolves itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But you experience, so there is a map there. You can experience these deficits, or your experience can be that your maps have changed. And so you have a very different awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely get that. So like I remember what it was like seriously in high school, like the honeymoon effect that came from weight training was ridiculous. I mean, myself and I had friends who were able to put on weight pretty fast. Like all we were doing was lifting weights and eating as much as we could.
Mm-hmm.
And you can change your body type in a reasonably fast, amount of time and feel different. And it feels not like you for a little while. And you can also experience this with weight loss. And I actually have experienced this very recently. I've shed a lot of weight, and I've been working on this now since February, and tracking my food, dialing in what I need to make my diet healthier for me with where I am, and then I got to a point where I was feeling good enough where I was like, okay, I'm going to start reducing calories because I feel like I can, and I want to lose body fat. And so I've been going through that process, and there was like two instances, and this didn't last long, but I remember for like a week, I was putting on certain clothes and feeling very different in those clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had less body fat than before, and it was like my maps had changed. It was really odd. And so it can kind of work both ways. Like gaining weight, you can experience this. Dropping weight, you can experience this. So in my experience, it just sort of works itself out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of those things, but it's interesting. I think that for you, gaining muscle and through that process and feeling that, I feel like that probably happened to me when I was in high school,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't recognize it.
Sure.
Because I put on quite a bit of lean, muscle at certain points, especially in the off season when I wasn't as focused on wrestling and stuff. So it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, part of why I think I remember it is at the time I had an office job, so you'd have to wear like button down shirts and slacks and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
at some point I was like, well, gotta get new clothing because this isn't going to work. Like with a t-shirt, it can kind of stretch and you're okay. But
It's funny.
anyways, so we talked about history findings. I imagine you might have a list of assessments, perhaps.
I do.
That
I got some stuff.
do. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay, so let's say I'm working with somebody and I very quickly want information on their parietal lobe. I can have them do smooth pursuits to the right.
Mm-hmm.
I can have them do smooth pursuits to the left. If I see lousy smooth pursuits ipsilaterally, I might think about that side of their parietal lobe. There's other things involved.
That's the occipital lobe, because that's what the lobe involved with
vision.
Right.
Yeah, so there's going to be other stuff involved as far as the lobes. It's a visual stimulus. There's going to be eye muscles and cranial nerves involved in the direction that you're actually pursuing to. So there's other levels there, but generally speaking, we can use that as a form of parietal lobe assessment. Mm-hmm. Some of these things might come through observation. And if you wanted to test left-right discrimination, you actually can. They have apps and things that can give you some input on how you recognize a right hand versus left hand. Somebody who's really struggles with right-left discrimination, they might just tell you, right? Because it's actually a thing for them. Mm-hmm. I've had people mention that in history when we get to those conversations. You can use right-left discrimination as an assessment, mm-hmm. And you can create different drills if that was important to you. You can use reading as an assessment. Reading is going to involve the parietal lobe a lot. So maybe that's important for anyone out there who's working with kids and trying to help them with, reading comprehension and stuff. It can be an assessment and a drill. And we can also use dual tasking, typically with gait. So it's kind of an interesting one where you're adding, like an easy way to do it is to add some form of cognitive load to walking. So mm-hmm. now people are doing two things. This is pretty common for me, especially when I'm doing gait testing, to have people walk, but then at some point I'll add a cognitive load and see, is that more challenging, less challenging? What does it do for the gait? In fact, let me tell a quick story, because this was yesterday. So in our membership, we've got courses, but then we also have a top secret membership that I hardly ever talk about. And it's where people continue their education. It's just that we do different things inside the membership. We meet every single week on Thursdays. And one of the things that our students were really nudging us to do was to work with people in the community who volunteer themselves to run through like mini sessions so that our students can actually see the process. So we did our first one yesterday, and it was really cool. We had a lady in the community. She shared history. We did a little history taking. Then we got into some assessments. And her main goal was to find strategies to help her with ongoing chronic neck tension. And so I had her test her neck, and she showed me movements of her neck. Rotating was very stiff for her. And we started doing some assessments. The first thing that I did was gait, because that's typically one of the first things that I'll do with everybody. And in gait, we saw several different patterns. So I kind of noted those and used it as an educational moment for the students watching. And as I'm watching her walk, I noticed decrease in or a loss of arm swing bilaterally. So her arms were not swinging as much as they probably should have been. And the motion was not pendular-like coming from the shoulder. Mm-hmm. When we see that, it typically makes us think about the contralateral cortex at a very simplistic level. There's other stuff, but that's typically what we think about. And I saw it on both sides, so I was thinking about both sides of her cortex at that point. As she was doing this gait assessment, I said, okay, this time I would like you to continue to walk, but I would like you to say every other day of the week while you walk. And she started doing this, and I just let her walk and walk and walk. She's now concentrating on saying every other day of the week. And all of a sudden, we start seeing changes in her gait. People got excited about this because we typically, at first, what we saw was a lot of thoracic stiffness, and she was complaining about tension in her thoracic spine that traveled all the way up to her neck. And as she started multitasking during gait, her thoracic spine started to move better. We then saw more movement in her pelvis, and then all of a sudden, she had increased bilateral arm swing. And so it was a great educational moment where I said to our students, I said, do you see how we're getting a big clue here that multitasking or dual tasking with gait, with this cognitive load, is actually a very good drill for her, because we're seeing her movement improve in the spot. So we did that to get our assessment. And then she came back to the camera and she kind of had a little smirk on her face. And she was like, this is crazy, but I already feel better. And I said, test your neck. And she tested her neck rotations, and she had like 20 degrees neck rotation restored on both sides. And she said, it feels a lot better. That was just from a cognitive load while walking. So that type of dual tasking, we can kind of associate in part with the parietal lobe. And so we started learning a lot about her cortical needs, which was really cool. We got a lot of information fast, and we were able to do some cool stuff with it. We went on to get even more results with some other movement drills, but it was neat to see that. And I think some of our students were like blown away.
Yeah.
Because they had heard about doing that, but maybe hadn't yet tried that with a client. And you can see it go the other way too. Sometimes you add a cortical load or some sort of cognitive challenge to walking, and you see people's gait get worse.
Well, that's what I was expecting with the story. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And it went the other way, which is great. Best case scenario. And then it gave me more clues on what types of drills to do. And yeah, it was quite successful for kind of a mini session. So other things for assessments, identifying shapes upside down. Personally, I've never done that. Sometimes it's used at a clinical level. And then this is a really neat one that I use like crazy. Contralateral inferior visual field stimulation. Okay, this is so cool. So if you look at visual processing and the different pathways that are involved with visual processing, different parts of the visual field relate more or less to certain areas of the cortex. So when it comes to visual stimulus in the inferior part of the visual field, so think about the lower part, that information is going to route to the parietal lobe. So that means I can use it in two ways. I can use it as an assessment, and maybe I notice that people have worse visual skills in this inferior part of the visual field. And that might make me think about their parietal lobe. Typically for me, I use it as a drill because I might want to stimulate the inferior visual field with, let's say, light, or light plus some vision exercise that we're doing in order to train the parietal lobe. Super cool, unbelievably applicable. I use it all the time because if we do the upper field, we're now thinking more temporal lobe. So, and knowing this is so cool. So again, this is, the woo-woo of neurology that's not woo-woo. If I want to possibly activate the temporal lobe to help people with auditory processing, my visual targets are going to be up high. If I want to help somebody with spatial awareness or improve sensation or improving reading or handwriting or left-right discrimination, like we've been talking about with the parietal lobe, I want my visual targets down low. Crazy to know that. I've done some fun stuff too, where I purposely occlude different aspects of the visual field using glasses with like black electrical tape, and having people do movement drills, but only letting light in through those certain aspects of the visual field to do this stuff. And it's so fun, like to be able to like fine tune and like get precise like that. Kind of neat. So that's one that I use. Maybe not as much as an actual assessment, but that's a very common for me to use the visual fields and even just like light stimulation to as a stack, because even if you don't want to be that specific about it, just like creating light sensation on the opposite side is going to stimulate the contralateral cortex and the parietal lobe in part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting you said reading, because I was thinking that could be a great stimulus in the inferior field anyways, right? Since the parietal lobe's already involved with reading, you're kind of getting a double stack there.
Yep.
This brings up another good point, is that you often sort of use assessments and drills interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important point, is like the same thing that can help you determine where to look is also probably the thing that's targeting that place you're looking, right?
Yes, it's almost like it's like we always say to our students, the assessment can become the drill in some cases, and the drill is always an assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when you get better and we get good with this material, everything you have somebody do is actually an assessment, right? And it'll tell you a lot, so that it kind of works, interchangeably there. As far as drills go, I mean, there's some cool things to mention. First of all, like if you're trying to activate the parietal lobe, passive stimulus actually becomes very valuable. So thinking about any kind of sensory stim, like we talked about, that could be vibration, could be light touch. You can even use electrical stimulation, has been shown to be good. So like a TENS unit or something, like putting those pads on the skin to create e-stim. And kinesiotape can be used kind of through the lens of, okay, which parietal lobe are you trying to activate? So if I put K-tape on the left side of my body, that's going to be a stronger stimulus for the right parietal lobe.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you can think about it through kind of more the brain-based lens with kinesiotape versus just taping a condition. All right, it's neat like that. And then something people never think to use, gels and creams that produce sensation.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever seen like Tiger Balm or something like a Bengay that is like a chemoreceptive type thing where you feel something from putting it on, like the back and forth of warm, cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like Tiger Balm. I've used those as sensory training tools for people. All right, so you can apply that to different areas of the body and create passive stimulus, which can really help people move better, and it can help results stick better. It can help you get long-term results by using passive stimulus as you do other things. It's one of the reasons why I love kinesiotape. It's one of the reasons why I like the Tiger Balm, because people can have those things on their skin and get ongoing stimulation of those receptors, which will affect that contralateral parietal lobe. And you could stack movement drills with those sensory inputs, which is kind of the whole point, right? To maybe you're trying to improve quality of movement, you add a passive sensory stimulus, very, very useful tool. And manual techniques, right? Practitioners that have good manual techniques, as soon as you touch the skin, you're training the parietal lobe. So it really helps to know which parietal lobe are you training. If I'm doing manual work on the left side of someone's body, well, that is doing other things at the receptor level, at the peripheral nerve level, and with different sensory pathways. But eventually, you got to look at it as a contralateral parietal lobe stimulus. And so knowing that as a manual therapist, when you get good with brain-based work, your manual therapy starts looking really creative but weird to people, because someone's right knee might be the painful area that they're hoping to improve, and you're doing manual therapy on their left elbow. And you might have brain-based reasons for doing that, depending on why you think that right knee is bothering them. Because if that right knee is really, let's say, a reflexive stabilization problem, it's going to make you think about the opposite side of the brainstem. It's going to make you think about the opposite cortex. So your manual techniques on the left elbow eventually stimulate the right parietal lobe, and that downstream effect on the right side of the brainstem. Mm-hmm. So things can start looking weird, but then there's reason for it, right? Which is kind of cool. And then I mentioned the inferior visual field stimulus. And one other really neat thing about actual vision training is that when you're doing vision exercises, yes, there's other things going on than just stimulating the parietal lobe, but we can make a tweak to a lot of our vision training drills by understanding that where, like mapping where a visual target is in space or where you are in space makes a stronger parietal lobe stimulus.
Right. Like you talked about tracking to the opposite side, or to the same side or the opposite side?
Yes, it was ipsilateral as far as the parietal lobe.
And then also like the region, like the inferior region.
Exactly. Yeah. And then also like I guess a way to explain it is doing vision drills to different targets and understanding like where the target is relative to you. So different from using vision training drills that are asking you to recognize something. So for example, juggling, like we talked about, is something you're working on with the scarves. Juggling is going to be a blend of both temporal lobe and parietal lobe. Okay. And again, those aren't the only things involved, but it's a visual stimulus, right? And you are recognizing, let's say, the colors of the scarves. And I might have you juggle and say, hey, I want you to call out the colors that you're catching, right? Or the color that you see at kind of the top of the curve. Now we're using a visual stimulus, but we're adding recognition with color, which is going to be more temporal lobe based on how the information or where the information goes through these pathways. That's the what is it pathway, simply put, for vision work. And the where is it pathway is more related to the parietal lobe. Now, the where is it is interesting because to learn how to juggle, you have to know how far does your body need to be away from the scarves. You also have to target the scarves when you're, plucking them out of the air. And you have to know what targets are you actually trying to throw the scarves to as they cross your body. That's more of the where is it. Someone who has a problem with the where is it pathway or the parietal lobe in general has a hard time placing themselves in the environment relative to what they have to do. Maybe think about it as like a boxer has to always know their distance from the opponent. And if there's a deficit there, it's costly for several reasons. They're going to get hit when they don't want to get hit. And they're going to have a hard time hitting the opponent because the distance is off. That's a very high-level proprioceptive skill that we take for granted that is very much mapped by the visual system. And the parietal lobe helps us understand where we are in space as we do something like that. So it's cool to know those little things about visual processing because you might have a reason for wanting to create vision training drills that are more about where is it in space versus what is it.
Interesting. So any more drills?
That is my list of, the most common stuff, right? And just remember, movement, I mean, it can be anything. I've taken, so any client that I've had in the past that has had some pretty large parietal lobe deficits, one of the things that I didn't mention that I like to do is like ground-based movement drills. And the reason is we've got a lot of motor control and, being able to handle your body and a lot of coordination that comes from different ground-based movement drills, but you also have that tactile sense that's built into it because you're on the floor. So rolling around on the ground, crawling, it's a very different feeling than standing up, right? I've noticed over the years that when I take a person that seems to have some pretty strong like sensory motor deficits, that ground-based movement is very useful. And I think it's because it's almost like a a stronger blend of sensory and motor together that can really help them. So usually start with an exercise called partial rolling, where you kind of curl yourself up into a ball, roll back onto your shoulder blades and come back up. You basically give your back a massage as you're sort of mapping what it is to roll backwards and forwards and keep your balance as you roll. Little things like that, kind of evolving into more complex type ground-based movement, if you want to take it that way, starts resembling martial arts, dance, all that kind of, all those animal type flow movements that, you know, people enjoy doing on the ground. A lot of it looks like jujitsu to me. And wrestling, you know, that's where I learned most of, you know, the ground-based stuff that I still teach to this day is through wrestling. Great parietal lobe stimulus.
You know, what's interesting about that is I feel like that's how we learn how to move as infants, right?
Built into the system.
Yeah. So it would make sense that if I would almost like consider it like a motor regression, right? It's like, okay, if we get down on the ground, like this is the foundation that we built everything else on, and you can kind of reestablish that perhaps.
Yeah, and if you've ever watched an infant learn how to move and eventually walk, well, it's all visually driven, right? It's all visually driven, and a lot, you know, all the movement that you see take place on the floor, and you know, as a baby goes through different stages of sitting up and scooting and crawling and eventually rolling, and then, you know, they get to half kneeling positions and climb on things a lot. It's really interesting to see them eventually make their way up to, you know, 2 legs. And when they do that initially, you can tell they were not built for it. They look like, you know, I remember my daughter when she was learning how to get up to 2 legs, she looks like she was riding a horse. You know, and you know, they get up and they're like, now what? Because I don't have the body for this yet. And you just kind of see this evolve over time. It's really wild. But yeah, it's like all built into the process, which the natural process, which is so interesting. And it's why you actually don't want to skip stages, right? You don't want to skip stages of infant development because there can be consequences for it later.
Yeah. The last thing I'll mention about the ground-based practice is the vestibular element.
Yeah.
You know, in the past when we've talked about kind of rolling and that kind of thing, a lot of times we talked about it as a vestibular stimulus, right?
Yes.
That makes me wonder if there's a connection between I mean, there's a connection between everything, but a more marked connection between the vestibular system and the parietal lobe, perhaps.
Yeah. What it would want me to do, and I don't know the answer right now, but it makes me curious about developmentally, like when the brain is literally developing. What are there any connections there, right? In terms of which came first, or what lived next to each other during the development? Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know, but I'm curious to look that up when we're done.
So you just in your practice, you wouldn't think like, oh, I want to do a vestibular drill because I think they have a parietal deficit.
You can you can make anything mean anything. You know, so it's typically in the work that I'm doing, if I see pretty large cortical deficits with the parietal lobe, I know that person probably doesn't move very well. Put it this way, I've never had a client, and it seemed like arrows were pointing at the parietal lobe. I've never had a client that moved well with those findings. But I have had a client, many, that had temporal lobe issues, or even frontal lobe issues, which is highly involved in voluntary movement, but they move great. Right? With the parietal lobe, anytime I've seen pretty strong deficits there, people usually don't move very good. you don't move very good, you probably have a vestibular system that is
under
let's say
stimulated, under
yes, understimulated maybe, but you're not as competent, right? Because you can have a good vestibular system, which is essentially like having the most expensive, highest tech compass. The most expensive, highest tech compass is going to give you all this detailed, accurate information on how you're moving, which way is up and which way you're going. If you don't move well, you probably don't have the highest tech compass as far as your inner ear goes. Or your inner ear might also be working overtime to try to help you based on those deficits. So it would not be uncommon for somebody with larger parietal lobe deficits to also have deficits in their vestibular system. So looking at it that way, where maybe we're talking at this point about more functional connection, versus like I can draw
pathway
this line
connection.
Yeah, exactly. In that respect, absolutely. And if you wanted to draw lines, eventually, like I said, you can make anything mean anything. Any kind of cortical deficit is going to impact, let's say, the cerebellum. The cerebellum and the vestibular system are talking back and forth constantly.
Right.
And so there's going to be effects there for sure that impact just motor control, coordination, rhythm, balance, all that stuff.
Yeah. And I guess what it would come back down to is, let's say you have some theory about how they're connected, whether it's functional or not.
Right.
You could assess it and you could find out.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. That's literally the most important thing. I mean, I spend all this time in our community and our courses teaching people theory, and people they get really good with it. It's pretty cool. And then we always just have to just keep coming back to this idea that what we know is just not even as useful as the functional outcome of what's actually happening. And, it's definitely the most important thing to keep track of the work you're doing, assess it, and see what the functional outcome actually is.
Yeah. Very cool. Any final thoughts?
Let's see. So if any of the history findings kind of resonated with you or maybe a client you're thinking of, start to think about how you might help them move better by bringing in more parietal lobe stimulus. And I'll kind of recap some of the easy ideas so that people can, think about this and really solidify it in their mind. Adding feedback to any movement where the sensory experience is heightened is going to be a parietal lobe type of drill. So that might mean adding vibration to movement. It could mean using bands and feeling the bands on your skin. It could mean passive stimulus like we talked about with kinesio tape, compression clothing, any kind of wrapping the body in a band, gels, the Tiger Balm idea. Those are all really simple things that can go a long way, right? When you add sensory, you typically see improvements in motor. You do need to know more neurology to do this in a sophisticated, precise way. And if obviously we got you covered if you want to learn that, because this is what we do deeply in our courses, because you got to know what side of the body do I do this on. And I told you all that in the episode, so you can explore the contralateral relationship. If you think you're trying to activate the right parietal lobe, you're going to do your sensory and motor work on the left side of the body. That's at least a great way to begin. So start applying some of that stuff to yourself, or work some of these ideas into what you're doing with a client. And maybe smooth pursuits would be a great sort of introductory vision exercise that you could work into to what you're doing too. And see if doing smooth pursuits helps improve spatial awareness and quality of movement. So I feel like there's some good low-hanging fruit and some tools here that are quite applicable to this parietal lobe conversation. All right, there it is. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode on the parietal lobe. Remember, at this point, if you haven't seen the free masterclass that I teach, you can still watch that. Find the link in the show notes. I go deeply into the brainstem. So a little bit different than what we talked about today, which is good. You learn about cranial nerves and some of the basic foundational education that we teach everybody, that it just helps you understand the philosophy and what we're actually doing in terms of brain-based movement work. So make sure you check that out. And if you haven't done so already, we would really appreciate it if you dropped us a review on the podcast. I know that many of you guys have, and we really appreciate that. And we really appreciate your support here on the podcast. That's it for today. We'll be back soon.